And Night Stalkers, it's me, your twisted Southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. I want to say a big welcome back to all my demented deviants. I'm glad to have you hanging out with me here tonight on Facebook and Armed Radio and, of course, TuneIn Satellite. Hold on to your asses because it's going to be one hell of a ride tonight, folks. But before we get started, I got to give a few shout outs to a few different people. First up would be the Picayune Writers Club. I went there to speak for their 9th annual symposium this weekend. And I got to tell you, I really had a blast. I only heard a few gaffes coming from the audience and only managed to offend 2 people to the point of leaving. So that's a breakthrough for me. I'm really proud of that. And I think I did set off somebody's pacemaker, but other than that, I really did enjoy it. And I think they did too. Anyway, this was the event that I've been telling you guys about. It's the one where they negated inviting the children's authors because they'd invited me. I was the only hardcore horror writer there, but I ran into some similarly like-minded people. One twisted sister in particular, author Paula Harden. She was a really cool chick. I say she's similarly like-minded because I got to help her a little bit with getting her gore on, but hey, I can do that. Paula writes about vampires, and she's one heck of an artist. I got to see some of her work, and I actually have one of her pieces that I'm going to be having framed and hung up here in my girl cave to go with the rest of my creepy little collection. I wanted to say that I did learn a whole lot from some of the other speakers that were there too. It's always great to be surrounded by people who have the same passion for writing, though, even though their genres are way different than mine. But it was a really cool event, and what made it really special to me is that my favorite aunt came and hung out with me while I was there for the whole event. You know how there's that one aunt or one uncle that you want to be just like when you grow up? Well, Aunt Wanda was my favorite, and I think I did a pretty good job with it, except for the fact that I'm way more of a deviant than she ever was. But, you know, that happens sometimes, folks. We just sometimes overexceed our goals. Hey, I wanted to say a shout out to everybody joining me tonight. I see Stacy in the house. Big Johnny Blender's hanging out in the shop watching me, too. He's always stalking me. Big Joe Savino's in the house. That's the boss man, the owner of Armed Radio. And my boy, David Childers. Hey, David, what's happening tonight? So anyway, I wanted to share something else with you guys, too. When my Aunt Wanda came and hung out with me, she bought me a little surprise. She told me she'd been hanging on to these for a while for me. So I was so excited to get them. It was like Christmas. And I wanted you guys to see them, too. So hang on. These are so cool. These are tribal masks that I will be finding spots for here in the lady loft, the girl cave. One of my favorite, very colorful. I could just imagine this being used in some kind of voodoo ritual or something. So here's the first one. And then there's this one. He's really cool too. How awesome is that? Yes, indeed. All hand carved out of wood. Very, very cool. I'm so excited to have these. Then there's this one as well. This guy here is really heavy. And look, he's got fangs. No, he's after my heart. But isn't that cool? Got to figure out where to put these guys. And of course, I saved my favorite one for last. So hold on for this one. This guy right here has got some serious vibes with him. I don't feel anything negative with him, but what it is that's attached to him is it's very strong. There's no denying you can feel it when you touch him or see him. I showed him to Big Johnny Blender, and he almost put it on his face, and I thought I was going to have a cow. I'm like, oh, don't ever do that because you don't know what this was used in yet. I'm going to have to meditate on him for a while. But this is the absolute favorite one out of the bunch. Stacy said she likes it. Hey, Ronnie and Lori Owens are also in the house. How you like my new mask? My Aunt Wanda gave this to me. I absolutely love it. I don't see how somebody could wear this on their head because, like I said, they are all wood. They are all are hand carved and very heavy. So I have to make sure I put these somewhere where they don't fall on somebody's head when they walk in the lady loft. But I just wanted to share those with you. So stop hating. They are mine, but you can come visit me anytime and check them out in person if you want to. Other than that, mine. Okay, so the next big shout out goes to Bloody Harlan, Kentucky. I've already started packing for it. I got the thigh highs in the suitcase and the black lace and leathers being slung in there left and right. So I'm getting really close to being packed up and everything. And I'm looking forward to meeting those guys in person. And of course, I'm looking forward to corrupting more innocent minds and hooking up with some of my creepy cool friends from some of the past cons. Harlan Haunt Fest is going to be a trip. So if you're in the area, anywhere near Harlan, go get your ticket so you can come and meet me and hang out with Big Johnny Blender and the Adrian's Fury Dragster. She's always a crowd drawer. I see my Uncle DW in the house. You just missed it, Uncle D. I was showing everybody the mass ink one they gave me. But I do love doing the cons. It's cool to be amid the other creepy kids in one massive confined spot. And on the personal side, it's kind of like a big family reunion because all the folks that are involved from the event organizers and staff all the way down or up to the celebrities and other authors and artists and cosplayers and everybody who's there. Once you do some of these cons, you start seeing a lot of the same faces and you get to know these guys. And let me tell you, this is a breed of just really great people. A lot of people may walk in off the streets and see all these people in cosplay outfits and they think, oh my God, what freaks. Well, yeah, we're all freaks, but we're really good people. And, it's kind of like having a big family reunion every time we get together and hang out with our twisted little families and see folks maybe we hadn't seen for a few weeks or a few months. See what's going on in our lives and all that stuff. It's kind of like the big family reunions that your mom and dad used to drag you to when you were a teenager. The one where your second cousin twice removed keeps hitting on you during the entire event. Or was that just me? It's probably just me. But anyway, next weekend we're going to be hanging out with some of our twisted family like I was talking about. Tim Shockey's going to be there. That's the dude that cruises around with the green goblin head from Maximum Overdrive. Sal Lazar, my bad vampire Santa, he's going to be there corrupting folks right along with me. And, of course, our friend Josh TKO Turner, pro wrestler and actor in The Walking Dead, he's going to be there. John Anderson from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. That dude right there is as demented as I am. I just absolutely love him. And Cammie Roebuck's going to be there too. This chick is a serious cosplayer. You got to check her out. There's actually some pictures of her on authorlyngibson.com. You can see her in her Silent Hill garb standing next to the Adrian's Fury Dragster. And, of course, our artist friend Matthew Atchley is going to be there too. So I'm thinking probably after the after party at the hotel, y'all. What you say? Pack up the ice chest and all that fun stuff. I don't know if it's dry or wet there. It's Kentucky. You would think there'd be like moonshine stands on every corner like there are daiquiri shops here, but I could be wrong. So anyway, besides all of us creepy kids that are going to be hanging out there, there's all kind of other stuff going on during the event, like art contest and cosplay contest and costume contest and a film festival and a whole bunch of paranormal panels. So there's all kind of stuff going to be happening that day. If you're anywhere near there, go to harlanhauntfest.com and get your dadgum tickets before it's too late and they're sold out. So do have one more last shout out I wanted to go over. Rafe White from Southern Geek Fest, Mike Inslee from Pensacon, and the folks from Mobicon and QuestCon, who I don't know personally yet, but after the 14th, I will know them personally. That event actually started out as a small show in protest of this certain massive Canadian Comic Con that was invading the area during another local con's annual event. Well, this sucker has grown into a serious event, and we just hit October 2nd, and it's still growing. They actually outgrew the original venue within 4 days of setting the event up. Can you believe that? I'm going to be there with Big Johnny Blender and, of course, the Adrian's Fury Dragster, and so will a whole bunch of other celebrity guests. And I'm not as familiar with the guest list for this con as I am the Harlan Haunt Fest con, because I've been promoting Harlan a little bit longer. So go on to Facebook and search for Gulf Coast Fan Fest. Jump on the page, like the page, share the page, and check out everything that they've already got listed so far. Because I know a lot of you folks down here in the South are not watching NFL football on the weekends. That is a fantastic alternative. It is family friendly. Yes, I will be on my best behavior. I will not bite your children this time. I don't know about the next one, but this time I won't. So come on out, bring the kids, bring a sister, mother-in-law, all of them, and just have a good time. It is a free admission event, but man, there's all kind of crazy cool stuff going to be happening. So don't miss out on that. October 14th on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. All right, so now that I've given out all my shout outs for the night, go grab that cold one, dim the lights and lock the door. And you know you got to kick them kids out because we're fixing to get our scary on. Now, we're going to kick it off tonight with kids of a different sort. Kind of. I don't know, they're all kind of impish to me, but that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, there's a few little short tales about these critters that we know now as the black-eyed children. No, it's not a bunch of smart-ass little kids walking around with shiners. These kids have been showing up all over the place for a really long time. They've been creeping out folks with these hollowed, blacked-out eyes. These creepy kids have been spotted in many parts of the world, and those that seen them claim that they've got some kind of evil air about them, and they're not really kids at all. Now, they look like children around the ages of 5 to 12 years old, all of them with the same characteristics. These blank expressions on pallid faces with black and dawning orbs in the place where their curious childlike eyes should be, but they're not. Since the early 1960s, reports of black-eyed children have regularly been sighted in and around Cannock Chase, England. In 2015, it became national news when a group of paranormal investigators spotted and caught on camera a black-eyed girl out in the field. Now, nobody really knows much about who or what these creatures really are or where they came from, but what we do know is that the witnesses who report having encountered these little darlings say that they feel these children were somehow supernatural and extremely dangerous, even though they couldn't explain why. And most of them claim to have experienced some serious aftermath in the form of like strange occurrences, illnesses, or just bad luck in general. These kids, who overall vary in age from young adolescents to late teens, are believed by most to possess otherworldly abilities. There are several theories as to what these black-eyed children really are, and they range from extraterrestrial beings to blood-sucking vampires. They're most commonly spotted hitchhiking along the roads where there's a little bit of traffic, or they're panhandling on doorsteps in suburban neighborhoods. So I got a couple of quick tales about some of the folks who've actually been face-to-face with some of these creepy little kids. In January 2016, see, y'all thought I was going to go way back to the 50s and the 60s, but no, this is more recent. January 2016, this chick in Vermont made the tragic mistake of letting these two creepy black-eyed children into her home. A blizzard was raging outside when she heard a faint knocking on her door. So she goes to her door and she finds this little boy and a little girl standing there, and they're shivering, and they were begging her to use her phone. Well, she immediately felt like something wasn't quite right with these kids, but she let them in anyway. Then she went to go grab her phone. Well, after the kids walked into the family room, the lights started flickering, and she looked at them and she realized that their eyes were completely blacked out. So she's standing there staring at him with this horrified look on her face. Her husband's nose starts bleeding. And at the same time, the power goes out. After what she said felt like an eternity, the children spoke in unison, saying that their parents had arrived. So they turn and they head for the door, and this chick couldn't close it fast enough behind them. Well, she looks out the window and she sees these kids climb into a black car that was being driven by a man in a dark suit. Well, not long after she'd had this encounter, the chick's husband was diagnosed with severe skin cancer. Then she starts suffering with these regular nosebleeds and an onslaught of other medical issues. She's convinced their failing health is a result of letting these black-eyed children into their home. I gotta agree with her. Don't let the black-eyed kids in your house. Hey, David Childers, Facebook is doing craziness tonight, but yes, it is live. I am the undead, but yes, we are live right now. So anyway, there's another one. This one actually was a little bit further back. It was on March 17, 2008. There's this 12-year-old boy that had this nightmarish experience in a mall parking lot. Check this out. While he's waiting in his mother's truck for her to finish getting her hair did, he sees this boy walking across the parking lot. Well, he thinks it's one of his friends from school, so he starts banging on the window and trying to get his attention. Well, when the other boy turned around in his direction, he realized that wasn't a friend of his. So the kid starts watching, and he's confused as this strange kid's walking up, and he just starts staring at him through the window of the truck, and he sees that his eyes are completely black. Well, that's when the creepy kid starts staring at him, and he realized that it wasn't a kid at all. It was something else, something evil. So the creepy creature at the window starts telling him that he's got to let him in the truck. Yeah, well, the little boy panicked, and he crawls down on the floorboard underneath the glove compartment. After several minutes, a black-eyed kid gives up and he leaves. It gets even weirder here, folks, though. Check this out. When the boy's mother came back to the truck, she was telling her son that this black-eyed kid had walked into the salon and he was demanding the keys to her vehicle. Well, thank God she didn't give it to him, because God only knows what would have happened to her kid. Oh, and this one's crazy too. Check this out. One night, this dude's sleeping in the spare bed in his infant daughter's room when he hears this bump outside the house. So at first he ignores it, and he's thinking maybe it's the family cat, but the thumping just kept coming, and it was getting louder. So the dude goes and he checks around outside. He looks out on the front porch, but the cat's nowhere in sight. So he walks into the kitchen, and all of a sudden he looks up to see these two figures standing right outside his front door. Well, the second he spots them, they start knocking on the door, because this dude's an idiot. He opens the door. He said at first they looked like a couple of normal little boys around 10 or 11 years old, but they gave off this pungent, moldy odor. One of them asked if they could use his telegraph. So the guy's horrified. He's realizing that both of these kids' eyes were completely black, and he just absolutely ignored the odd remark about the telegraph, and he gets it out of his mouth stammering, "I don't have service in the house," and he hurries up and shuts the door and locks it. So he's making his way down the hall back to his daughter's room, but these two boys were thumping on the outside walls of the house as he's making his way down the hallway. So now this dude's really freaking out, and he grabs his little baby daughter and he's holding her to his chest while these boys are incessantly knocking on the window. Their eerie eyes and awful persistence made the man too scared to move. He sat crouched on the nursery floor for several hours, fighting to ignore these knocks that came every couple of minutes. Then all of a sudden his wife's alarm clock goes off. The knocking stopped, and the black-eyed children disappeared. Now, it may just be me, folks, but I really think that I'd have handled this madness in a whole different way. I might have had to make a big old pot of grits. What does that have to do with anything? Well, folks, especially guys out there, you better pay me some attention. If a Southern girl tells you that you're making her fixing to have to go make a pot of grits, apologize for whatever it was that you did, grab your keys, and back slowly out the front door of the house. You need to leave. That's not an invitation to dinner. She doesn't care if you're hungry or not. She's waiting for you to go to sleep, and she's going to dump that pot of grits all over you, and you're going to learn to not do that again. Just a word of warning. So here's your second heads up for the evening, right? Anyway, if these creepy kids come looking and knocking on your door late at night and there's this sense of foreboding starts washing over you, get away from the door quickly. They're not there to sell you Girl Scout cookies. I assure you that. All right. So I think we got the black-eyed kids out of the way. Definitely got the shout-outs out of the way. Now, you know me, guys. We're fixing to roll into a sadistic serial killer story and a shocking public service announcement. So make sure you're paying attention. And this is a good one. So this twisted freak show named Nikolai Domagalev. Now, I'm probably massacring that, but he deserves it, so it's okay. We're going to call him Nikolai. He was sent to jail in 1981 after admitting to killing and eating his victims. Police believe that he murdered at least 10 women before he was caught. But this madman admitted to killing more, a whole lot more. Nikolai was known as Metal Fang. He was born in the era of the Cold War in Russia, and he lived his life in Kazakhstan under the Soviet imperial rule, working as a laborer. So that kind of tells you what kind of a life he had. Those that knew him personally considered him to be highly intelligent and a polite individual, pretty much just another normal guy, with the exception of having a mouthful of white metal teeth. Now, at some point, probably after having acquired syphilis, he decided that he had a calling to rid the world of prostitutes. We've heard that one before, right? So because he personally deemed them unclean, they just had to go. He'd lure these women away to dark places, then stab and rape them. But he wasn't finished there. Once they were dead, he'd hack their bodies into pieces with an axe. He was eventually convicted of murdering 10 women, but he confessed to having killed as many as 100 during his purge. Finally, in December 1980, Metal Fang was caught when 2 of his guests that he'd invited over for dinner found a severed head and a stash of entrails while at his house. After he was convicted, he was declared insane and committed to a mental institution, but he managed to escape for 2 years. While he was on the run, he murdered several more hookers, disposing of them the same way he'd done the ones before, which landed him in the nut house to begin with. Eventually, he was recaptured and they locked him back up. Now, Metal Fang is one of the world's most notorious cannibal killers. In a chilling confession, he described the details of his first murder. Here it is, folks. He said, "I always loved to hunt, and I went hunting often, but this was my first time hunting a woman. She resisted, and I cut her throat with a knife. Then I drank her blood. I cut her breast into strips and removed her ovaries and separated her pelvis and hips. I then folded these pieces into a backpack and carried them home. I melted the fat and used it to cook with, and some of her parts I pickled. I also put her parts through a meat grinder and made dumplings. I saved the meat for myself. I never served that to anyone else. Twice I grilled the heart and the kidneys, grilled meat too, but it was tough, and I cooked it for a long time in its own fat. The meat of this woman took me a month to eat." Interesting, right? Oh, hey, William. Good to see you in the house tonight. Hope you're enjoying the show. So, yeah, this was a sick individual, and guess what? There's more to his reign of terror, and here's your public service announcement. The Sun reports that concern is growing after reports that Metal Fang has been on the loose since escaping from a secure hospital on December 23rd of last year. Terrified residents of Kazakhstan claim to have seen him shortly after the reported breakout. He's already being blamed for the disappearance of a 22-year-old woman who's not been seen since New Year's Eve. Fantastic. So, daywalkers, stay out of Kazakhstan. And if you're already there, I hope you're packing, because old Metal Fang has got to be starving for the taste of human flesh. Good evening, my sweet girl Belinda. Glad to see you joining us tonight. So since we're already rolling on the serial killers, let me tell you about a couple more. First up is Luis Garavito, known as the Colombian Beast. Garavito was born on January 25th, 1957. He's the oldest of 7 brothers and apparently was subjected to physical and emotional abuse by his father. In his testimony, he described being a victim of sexual abuse. Garavito had just 5 years of schooling and he left home at 16, working first as a store clerk, then as a street vendor who sold religious icons and prayer cards. Keep that in mind the next time you're at a street fair, folks. So, anyway, as an adult, he's drifting around from job to job. He's drinking heavily and he's acting like he's crazy insane until he wore out his welcome and then he'd move on to the next town. He attempted suicide at least once and was under psychiatric care for 5 years, according to police reports. He'd confessed to killing at least 140 boys between the ages of 8 and 16 over a 5-year period that ended when he was jailed on April 22, 1999, on an unrelated rape charge concerning a 12-year-old boy. He'd befriend these children and take them on long walks until they got too tired to move on. Then he'd tie them up to trees with nylon rope, slit their throats or behead them, and bury their bodies in shallow graves. Investigators presume a large number were sexually abused as well. He stated that all of his crimes were committed when he was drunk and was taken over by a superior being. So far, the police have found 114 of their skeletons. Heather Gamble, Skiro, good to see you in the house tonight. Glad you're getting your scary on. So, in November of 1997, the police actually dig up a mass grave of his victims. It was 25 boys that he tortured and murdered and buried in a ravine somewhere. That gruesome little discovery was initially thought to be the work of a satanic cult by these local authorities, but they decided they were going to create this nationwide task force which started to see similarities between this crime and other crime scenes where they were finding all over the country. So legally, the case against Garavito isn't closed yet because he's still actually confessing to murders today. In 2003, he was technically found guilty 70 times for 160 separate killings. Since he was considered to be sane, they couldn't ship him off to a forensic psychiatric institution, so he was sentenced to custody in prison. Now, the Colombian legal system, the sentences for single offenses are added up, and he was actually sentenced to about 2,600 years in prison, but that doesn't mean he's going to serve a lifetime in prison. After the reform of Colombian Penal Code in 2000, a person can neither be sentenced to death nor stay in prison for more than 40 years in total. Since Garavito is highly cooperative, an early release might actually be granted. Awesome. Oh, then there's this other bright and shining little star from Colombia. Pedro Lopez actually boasts a list of victims even longer than Garavito. He was born in Colombia. He was actually the son of a politician and a prostitute. This madman actually started showing signs of sexual deviancy by the age of 8. Lopez would go on to become known as the Monster of the Andes, after admitting to the rape and murder of over 300 girls. At age 12, he was taken in by an American family and enrolled in a school for orphans, but he ran away because he was molested by a male teacher. At 18, he was gang raped in prison, and he claimed to have killed all 3 of the rapists while he was still locked up there. After he served his stint in jail, he started preying on young girls in Peru. He later claims that by 1978, he'd killed over 100 of them. He winds up getting caught by this local tribe. So they're actually getting ready to execute him when an American missionary steps in and persuades him to hand him over to the police. So they did. But then the police released him. Thanks for that, right? Then he relocates to Colombia and later on in Ecuador, where he starts killing an average of 3 girls a week. He gets arrested again in 1980, but the government in Ecuador freed him again in 1998. He was deported to Colombia then. In an interview from his prison cell, Lopez described himself as the man of the century and said he was being released for good behavior. Hang on, y'all. It's fixing to get even better. A A&E biography documentary stated he was released again from prison on August 31st, 1994, then rearrested an hour later as an illegal immigrant and handed over to the Colombian authorities, who charged him with a 20-year-old murder. He was found to be insane, held in a psychiatric wing of the Bogota hospital. In 1998, he was declared sane and released on $50 bail. So, the same documentary says that the Interpol sent an advisory to Colombian authorities for his rearrest for a murder in 2002, but nobody's seen or heard from him since his release in 1998. Nobody even knows if he's dead or alive. This psycho freak killed his young victims by luring them away from marketplaces with the promise of giving them shiny little trinkets like hand mirrors. He took them to secret hideaways where he had pre-dug graves, and sometimes there were corpses of past victims left exposed in these shallow pits, just waiting for somebody else to join him. Lopez lulled these innocent little girls in by holding them in his arms like a loving parent all through the night before he'd rape them at sunrise. He explained himself in an interview saying this: "At the first sign of light, I'd get excited. I forced the girl into sex and put my hands around her throat. When the sun rose, I'd strangle her. It was only good if I could see her eyes. I never killed anyone at night. It would have been wasted in the dark. I had to watch them by daylight." He said it took the girls 5 to 15 minutes to die. He said also, "I was very considerate. I would spend a long time with them making sure they were dead. I would use a mirror to check whether they were still breathing or not." Lopez slit the girls' wrists or throats to see if blood was still pumping. If they'd somehow survived, he finished them off. How nice of him. "Sometimes I had to kill them all over again," he admitted. "They never screamed because they'd never expected anything would happen. They were so innocent." He explained how he snared his victims. "I walked among the markets searching for a girl with a certain look on her face, a look of innocence and beauty. She'd be a good girl, always working with her mother. Well, I followed him, sometimes for 2 or 3 days, waiting for the moment when she was left alone. I'd give her a pretty shining trinket, then get her to leave with me for the edge of town where I had promised to give her another trinket for her mother." The killer also revealed he'd wanted to rape and kill the children of visiting tourists. "I often followed tourist families wanting to take their beautiful blonde daughters, but I never got the chance. Their parents were too watchful." Lopez acted out gruesome parties with his dead victims, propping them up in their graves and talking to them. He confessed that his little friends liked to have company, and he often put 3 or 4 girls in a single hole and talked to them all night. He said it was like having a party, but after a while, because they couldn't move anymore, I got bored and I went looking for new girls. He explained why he only chose the very young girls. He said, "It's like eating chicken. Why eat old chicken when you can have young chicken?" I kind of get that. The monster's madness came to light in 1979 when a river overflowed near the town of Ambato, Ecuador. The bodies of 4 girls washed up on the banks. 3 had been strangled so fiercely that their eyes had popped out of their sockets. The 4th child's eyes were still in her head, frozen open in horror. What a fiend. Okay, so I think we might have actually got our serial killer fix taken care of for the evening. The next little tale is about another urban legend that our friend Stacy Abernathy hooked me up with. Now, it's not very often that an urban legend gets away from me that's in my home state, but this one actually escaped me. I'd never heard of it till Stacy tagged me in a post about it a few weeks back. So this little tale is about the Devil's Toy Box. Not exactly what you're thinking, I bet. Like pretty much everywhere else, this small town in northern Louisiana had its own little annual haunted house attraction that went up every October. It was called the Farmer's Grave Haunted Orchard, and Unfortunately, it was a dud. After years of disappointing local thrill seekers, the owners decided to spice things up a bit for Halloween 2014. So they built a bunch of new props, and one of them was this windowless shack that they called the Devil's Toy Box. But the new and improved haunted attraction would only remain open for less than a week. But it wasn't because it was still a dud. So the story actually starts going around on the internet a few years ago. But some folks say the legend goes way, way back. They say that a paranormal researcher named Joshua Warren stumbled across a shack in Louisiana that had been deserted after the residents had been admitted into insane asylums. Inside this shack, the walls, floor, and ceiling had been covered with mirrored panels that faced inward, so you were inside, you saw yourself from every single angle. As we all know here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, folks have used mirrors for centuries for portals, and some of them have some really crazy legends associated with them. And in some folklore, they're believed to be a gateway into another realm. In other urban legends, like Bloody Mary, the mirror can be used as a corridor from one dimension to another. And in some cases, it's believed that the mirrors act as a pathway for something or someone evil to pass from their world and into ours. Now, the Devil's Toy Box operates kind of on the same principle, just on a much larger scale. Folks say that if someone stays inside for too long, looking at nothing but themselves, they will not only go insane, but they'll also open a pathway to hell. This pathway allows the devil to enter our world and steal their soul. But some folks believe that he goes a step further than that and actually steals the flesh as well. So this dude Warren first learned about the Devil's Toy Box from this chick he refers to as Erin. Erin and Warren both refused to say where exactly in Louisiana the cabin's located, out of concern that some local thrill seekers might go to test the theories. But they did say that there's some locals that believe the cabin had always been there and that the haunted attraction was actually built around it. Lee Mack, my girl, has joined in for the evening. What's up, babes? So we're talking about the Devil's Toy Box right now. You joined in at a good time. This is a good Louisiana urban legend. So Erin said that she never went in the cabin, but she claimed that she knew people who had been hospitalized after they spent time inside. A timer was even set up outside to record just how long folks stayed in there. The record was 5 minutes, set by a man named Roger Heltz. This 52-year-old father of 3 was reportedly mute when he came out. A 17-year-old boy had to be dragged out, kicking and screaming, and one woman suffered a heart attack after she was only in there for about 90 seconds. Now, the boy was from a nearby parish, and he hadn't gone to Erin's school, but her friend Celeste claimed that her parents were friends with the boy's mom. They went to his funeral when he killed himself 2 weeks later. The haunted house closed quickly after that and never opened again, trying to cover up all the reports of injuries and mental problems that came from it. The door to the cabin was padlocked shut, and why it wasn't destroyed is still unknown. Perhaps the town was afraid that the curse of those powerful panels of glass may unlock. The rest of the haunted house attractions eventually disappeared into the Louisiana forest, while the cabin remained standing strong and showing only the slightest bit of age. According to Erin, it's still back there somewhere in the woods. Every once in a while, they hear a story about a group of high school students stumbling upon it. Their story always ends up with a friend driven insane by what they saw, each of them being dragged from the little cabin screaming. Johnny Alfonso's in the house, so's Kenny Ryder. Hey guys, glad you're hanging out with me tonight. So I guess since we've done the Devil's Toy Box, we might as well do the Devil's Playground legend too, right? So in the country outside Yukon sits this old abandoned playground where ghosts are said to roam. According to the traditional Oklahoma City urban legend, the playground belonged to an old church down the street and was accessible by a bridge that ran over a small creek there. Well, one horrific day, a man came to the playground and he murdered all the children that he found there. Immediately after that, the church destroys the bridge that led to the playground, and the tragic little spot remained vacant for many years. All the slides and the equipment were moved in the mid-'80s, and it left this happy little place nothing more than just an overgrown memory. Now, of the few locals who actually dared to visit there, most of them claimed that they could feel the spirits of the murdered children around them. Some even heard the sounds of children playing there. Apparently, happier times were being relived at that point in time. Now we're going to cruise from Oklahoma City to Minnesota, St. Paul to be exact. We're talking about the haunted Griggs Mansion. Sitting on Summit Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota, surrounded by other Civil War era estates, is this grand 10-bedroom mansion. This well-preserved home was named after its original owner, Chauncey W. Griggs. Now, Griggs was a Civil War officer, and he was a grocery tycoon that had this lavish Victorian home built for him in 1883. He, however, only lived in the mansion for 4 years before he headed west for more adventure and profits. Now, Griggs Mansion still has beautiful wood-paneled walls and stained glass windows. The original carriage house is actually still standing out back there today. But in the late 1930s, the mansion was donated to an art school that stayed there for 25 years. That's when this fantastic skylight was installed above the top floor. Now, this art school was the exception for most who have owned Griggs Mansion over the past century, because most of the other folks that moved in moved out real fast. This mansion is known to be St. Paul's most haunted house. It has several ghosts with it, and a ton of paranormal activity goes down there every day. So one of the most active ghosts is a maid that worked there during the turn of the century. She had this failed love affair, was all depressed and everything, and she commits suicide by hanging herself on the top floor landing. Her apparition is still seen there today as a white mist. Many witnesses have felt her presence, and they say when they go up there and they sense that she's around, there's this overwhelming sense of doom right there in that little spot on the landing where she hung herself. Another former employee haunts the library. Now, Charles Wade was the mansion's obsessive caretaker and gardener. It's said that he spent hours in this library doing research on how to do his job better. His apparition has been seen in this room, and people have heard the rustling of pages of books when nobody else is around. When he died, he was in the middle of a project out in the garden, and some folks feel that he lingers around because of this unfinished little project. In 1964, Mr. Waschke bought the mansion with the intentions of using it as his home and office. Well, one night he's working at his desk in the library, and he sees this man with a long face, a white hat, and a dark suit who was just glaring at him from the doorway. As he sits staring at it, the apparition just faded away. When later he decided he would move and renovate, there was this one window that kept opening by itself. Well, finally, he's aggravated enough with it to nail the sucker shut. But the next morning, he gets up, the window's wide open, and all the nails are on the floor underneath it. "Hey, Jamie, my girl's in the house. I'm so glad to see you. I miss you. We need to hang out. We need to go do a con together or something." Anyway, back to other ghosts that are seen there. There's a old man with white hair who shows up in a black suit and top hat. They see him in several different rooms. He's not contained just to one area of the mansion. Now, in the early 1950s, Dr. Delmar Kolb joined the art school staff. He moved into a front basement apartment there in that mansion. Well, one night, he wakes up with 2 cold fingers pressed to his forehead. When he turned on the light, he sees this blue flash that disappeared. 2 nights later, he gets woke up again. But this time he sees a man in a black suit and top hat standing at the foot of his bed. The dark figure then just turned away and vanished into a nearby brick wall. The students that were at this art school were constantly complaining that they felt things while they were in their art class on the upper floor. It's like they always felt somebody looking over their shoulders at what they were working on, but there was never anybody there, at least nobody they could see. They thought that it could be the spirit of the maid that committed suicide on that floor. And when the art school moved out of the mansion to their new building, the staff was more than relieved that they didn't have to deal with these unseen ghosts anymore. Then there's this one other story that's still circulating today about these 3 doubter journalists from the St. Paul Pioneer Press. They stayed at this house one night in 1969 in order to do research for an article. These 3 set up on the top floor where the maid killed herself over 50 years earlier. By 4 a.m., these 3 wannabe badass men hauled ass out of the joint like a bunch of little girls. They said they kept hearing these heavy footsteps on the stairs heading toward the upper floor. So one of them nuts up and he goes to check out the staircase to see what's going on. Well, all of a sudden, the other ones hear him screaming that there was something right there beside him. So he's running back toward the room, and as he passes the door, the other 2 file in right behind him. And all 3 of them left the house by an outside staircase. Now, the folks that have more recently owned the place, they don't really broadcast all the paranormal goings on there, but none of them really ever stuck around for very long either. Griggs Mansion was actually put on the market in 2012, and it still has not sold. I think they need a realtor that would just advertise the market as market it as having haunted history and a place where you could do a haunted house and paranormal research. And the house is actually a money maker too, because you can rent out the basement apartments there for somewhere around $60,000 a year. That is, if the tenants are willing to stay there. And then you could, of course, charge admission at the door because it is a haunted house, and haunted houses make tons of money, and you could stay open all year. I'm just saying. Anyway, the apartments actually have ghost stories of their own. In 1959, 3 students moved into one of these basement apartments. Well, one night, one of them wakes up in the middle of the night and he sees the head of a child floating over his bed. Other students that have stayed in these apartments claim that they were constantly being shaken awake. So, yeah, maybe it could be just a little bit on the difficult side to keep those tenants in there. Now, next up, it's been a while, but I've got a bizarre little poltergeist story for you. So as you already know, here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, most of the time hauntings are centered around these creepy places where there's been some kind of dark history and, of course, plenty of death and trauma. But sometimes in the most terrifying cases, you'll find that you're being haunted by something that you don't want. And I don't mean your ex. Sometimes these malicious spirits latch hold to you, and no matter how fast or how far you run, they're still right there with you. And that, my friends, is exactly what happened to Jackie Hernandez during the time span between 1989 and 1990. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases since organized paranormal investigations became a thing. Jackie became the victim of a sadistic and evil spirit. She was a young mother of 2 who had just recently left her husband and was trying to make a fresh start. She'd only been living in San Pedro a short while, and she'd settled into a multiple job lifestyle, struggling to take care of herself and her kids. Things were already stressful, to say the least. That, mixed in with the emotional distress of facing a failed marriage, were definitely an overbearing burden. But she quickly made friends, and one of them, named Susan Castaneda, was her neighbor, who actually wound up helping out with the kids when Jackie was able to pull some extra shifts for a little extra cash. Well, one night Jackie comes home from work and she goes to check on her kids. She opens the door real slow, making sure she doesn't wake them up, but all of a sudden she has this like 13 ghost reality check. Sitting on the corner or in the corner of the room across from her was this haggard and horrifying old man. He was staring back at her with glowing and empty eyes. So Jackie freaks the hell out, hauls ass over to Susan's house. Well, it took a while, but Susan finally managed to settle her down enough where she could speak clearly enough to tell her what was going on. So after Jackie manages to get the whole story out, Susan knows that they're dealing with some kind of restless spirit. She suggested that Jackie reach out to Dr. Barry Taff and his team of paranormal investigators. So she did. But in the meanwhile, the panic level is rising in this house. It's like a pressure cooker in there. Jackie's terrified of whatever this spirit is that's afflicting them, and she's also terrified that something could happen to her kids. This haggard old man had made several appearances by now, and there were, of course, a barrage of other bizarre things going on in the house. Well, Taft knew Jackie was desperate for help, so he gathered his team, and they made Jackie their first priority. Now, when Taft and his crew roll up to the house, he and his 2 cameramen were met with this foul odor. We know what that means, right? The team spread out in search of the source, but nothing was ever found. After a while, the stench vanished, just as quickly as it had appeared. So Taft and his team managed to settle in, and only moments after their equipment was set up, there were these loud series of banging noises that started up in the attic. So they're like running around like crazy trying to figure out exactly where it's coming from. Well, it was Jackie that found out it was coming from the ceiling above her kitchen. This particular area had been a really active spot. Jackie informed Taft that she had seen a ghostly image of a severed head there before. At the same time, she heard this muffled and disembodied voice. Freddie Hoggett's in the house. Hey, Freddie, how you doing tonight, man? So it was during this hunt that they apparently had spurred this spirit. Jackie figures that it's a good idea to start telling the investigators about some of the other crazy stuff that's been going down there. So she tells them about various objects that had been thrown around by some unseen force, and she also added that the strange goo had oozed from the walls on several occasions. And with that, the team was off to start photographing the house. Now, it was during this photo session that 2 of the cameramen, Wheatcraft and Conrad, they decided they're going to go up to the attic and document that area. They were only upstairs for a couple of minutes before Wheatcraft was attacked. Something grabbed his camera from his hands and threw it across the room before shoving him on his ass. After that, they decided to call it a night, but they were now driven to return and find out what was the cause of all the ruckus. Alcohol-free tonight, folks. So, on day 2, things really didn't slow down a whole lot. Again, this malicious spirit decided that Wheatcraft was just going to be his bitch. It nearly took him out, too. So Wheatcraft and this other photographer, Gary Bohm, were in the attic. Now, Bohm looks over to see Wheatcraft struggling, and it looked like he was being strangled, because he was. This cord had somehow mysteriously managed to wrap itself around his neck. Now, Bohm runs over and helps force the cord from around his neck and helps Wheatcraft downstairs. After explaining what happened, Jeff Wheatcraft left the house, and he said he wasn't setting foot in there again, ever. Eventually, Jackie, near an emotional breakdown, goes back to live with the ex in the trailer park 300 miles north of San Pedro. Well, at first, everything seemed to just kind of gone back to normal, but the case wasn't closed. At least all the madness that she'd seemed to have left behind her came with her. Of course, right? It starts up again when Jackie was helping this neighbor store a TV in their shed. All of a sudden, the TV screen flickers, and staring back at her from the TV was the image of the haggard old man from the San Pedro house. Then the loud bangs start coming from inside the shed, just like they had in the attic. No joy, right? So a few days later, Taft, Wheatcraft, and Conrad head north for part 2 of their investigation. This time they start off with a seance, which would allow Jackie to speak with this ghostly groupie. Taft and his team claims that they have made contact with this apparition. It identified itself as the ghost of a man murdered in San Pedro Harbor. It also informed them that several other spirits were haunting the area, and Jeff had been targeted in an attack because he looked like the man that murdered him. The ghost admitted it had been using Jackie for her energy, and then immediately Wheatcraft was attacked again by an unseen force, leaving him physically fine, but emotionally and psychologically traumatized. Feeling that she should never have closure, Jackie talks her husband into moving. Well, that was going to be the next norm, right? Yeah. Jackie and them moved several times over the next several years. but at least it seemed like the paranormal activity lessened every time they moved. Eventually, she settled back down in Los Angeles, a good distance from her former home. Now, residents have come and gone in that San Pedro house, with several claiming to have heard strange and unexplainable sounds coming from that attic. Ultimately, Dr. Barry Taft suggested that the ghost was Herman Hendrickson, a 28-year-old man whose body was discovered floating in the harbor in March of 1930. His death had been ruled an accident by the LA Police Department. Taft also thought the ghost of the haggard old man may be that of John Damon, who originally built the home and perhaps is still residing there today. Many of Taft's cases involve clients who have suffered emotional distress and possible recent mental trauma. This may be the most famous such story, but it's certainly a common thread amongst paranormal tales. Taft concluded that Jackie's emotional distress at that time in her life helped contribute to the power of the hauntings. Since the first occurrence of the haunting, Jackie has gained a sense of safety and calm, forcing the spirits to weaken their hold on her. Since the haunting, Jackie and her family affected by these incidents say they've put everything behind them and moved on with their lives. Well, that's about all the scary I've got for you this evening, folks. Wanted to tell you thanks for hanging out tonight. If you got friends that like getting into scary too, hook them up with Facebook/Southern Horror Queen, or shout out my website, which is authorlynnGibson.com. You can find links there to books and blogs and videos and all kind of cool stuff. Adrian's Fury Dragster also has her own specific tab on that page, and you'll find some really cool stuff there. So that's about it for the evening. Going to be hitting the road this Thursday to get to Harlan Haunt Fest. Looking forward to that. In the meanwhile, kiddos, y'all keep it creepy, 'cause you know I will.